the world is suffering heavy losses due to COVID-19. There are many doubts about the origin of the virus. US officials had initial grounds to determine that the COVID-19 virus was leaked from a laboratory in Wuhan. Laboratory safety history has shown that pathogen leaks have occurred, sometimes with fatal consequences. In this video, let's take a look at the deadly virus leaks from the lab. Smallpox virus leak. By the late 1970s, smallpox had been eradicated from the wild, but research on the disease continues in several laboratories around the world, including one in Birmingham, UK, where a virulent strain of smallpox virus is handled. In the summer of 1978, a medical photographer working there named Janet Parker became ill. When pustules spread on her body, the local doctor diagnosed it as a severe case of smallpox. It was the third leak of the smallpox virus in that decade from a UK laboratory. A British government has drastically stopped the outbreak by urgently isolating hundreds of people and vaccinating many others. Thanks to those efforts, only one other person became infected, and that was Parker's mother. However, the female photographer experienced a painful, lonely death in quarantine and is believed to be the last known fatal victim of smallpox. But there is another victim of the incident. At that time, the press mentioned the director of the laboratory in Birmingham, a smallpox virus expert named Henry Besson. Although there was no evidence, the media still blamed him for the incident. Quarantined at home and in despair, Besson slit his own throat and died shortly thereafter. The British government has organized a thorough investigation into the outbreak. An investigation found Mr. Besson may not have followed adequate safety procedures and speculated that Parker contracted smallpox from a virus that leaks into the gas pipeline. A lawsuit later dismissed this explanation and raised the disturbing possibility that Parker herself had entered one of the workspaces without proper protection. To this day, the debate over the Parker incident remains unresolved. Anthrax spores from the lab. When laboratories let pathogens leak in a secret environment, it is much harder to confirm the source of the outbreak. A case in point is the Anthrax Outbreak in Svrtslavsk, a rather isolated city in the former Soviet Union. In 1979, rumors of anthrax killing dozens, even thousands, began to spread to the West. Later that year, Soviet newspapers confirmed some reports noting that more than 100 people had contracted anthrax after eating contaminated meat, and over 60 had died. It was a tragedy, but perhaps unavoidable because anthrax is readily apparent in local animal populations. However, US intelligence officials are not convinced by that. Satellite images show objects resembling disinfection trucks around the city, significantly focusing activity on a mysterious military facility known as Complex 19. CIA analysts hypothesized that the Soviet Union leaked a weaponized form of anthrax. The Soviets reacted indignantly to this allegation. In 1980, Russia's official news agency, TASS, published a rebuttal titled "A Seed of Deception," accusing the US of making false statements to gain geopolitical advantage. Next, under the administration of President Ronald Reagan, the CIA sought to better handle what happened. They asked Matthew Meselson, a renowned geographer and Harvard who worked on the biological weapons proliferation program, to directly evaluate the evidence. Mr. Meselson was not convinced by the US statements. In the 1980s, he dismissed another theory that the Soviet Union used some kind of fungus weapon in Laos. And initially, he was the same opinion about the anthrax, endorsing the official interpretation from the Soviet Union, with an important warning. If we do not have a thorough investigation in Svrtslavsk, it is impossible to know for sure what will happen. Michelson essentially supported the explanation that the meat was tainted, judging it to be a completely reasonable and consistent based on what was known about anthrax. He also arranged meetings with Soviet scientists to add credibility to this interpretation, with slides of pathology samples taken from the victims. The United States intelligence community, however, remained skeptical, and in this case the intelligence agencies, not the scientists, turned out to be right. After the break of the Soviet Union, Michelson and other researchers finally had access to pathological samples taken from the victims' lungs, which showed they had died from inhaling anthrax spores. The next revelation added to the picture of what happened. Turns out Complex-19 is a biological weapons base. Here, they produce anthrax spores. According to the laboratory director of the Complex-19 at the time, a filter connected to the spore dryer was clogged. This still happens often. The military officials in charge left a message for its replacement on the next shift, but did not enter the block book as is customary. When it came to the next shift, the replacement team looked at the notebook, saw nothing, and restarted the purifier. A series of anthrax spores quickly spread throughout the vicinity. Mr. Michelson eventually pieced together all the data and published a paper in the Science magazine, which combined wind data with interviews, pathological samples, and other evidence to describe the anthrax outbreak that killed more than 60 people. That was 1994, 15 years after the incident. Mysterious flu virus leak. In addition, there's another incident that took place in the Soviet Union that is still a mystery. In the same decade that witnessed the leaks of the smallpox in Britain, anthrax in the Soviet Union, there was also an unusual strain of flu at the time called H1N1. In 1977, an H1N1 outbreak broke out on the border between China and the Soviet Union. The epidemic eventually spread worldwide that year, causing an unusual proportion of young patients. The mortality rate from epidemics is relatively low compared to some strains of influenza, but that's not a problem. The worrying aspect of the epidemic is that this particular strain of H1N1 has not been present since 1950, when it was superseded by other strains of influenza. The appearance of that kind of back in time was confusing. Some researchers speculate that the virus may have escaped from a laboratory in the Soviet Union or China, but both countries deny this theory. However, the matter remains a puzzle for virologists. Many theories have been born and come to explain the so-called frozen evolution, the most prominent of which is the hypothesis that the virus spread to humans from a laboratory, possibly testing a vaccine to neutralize the swine flu. Covid-19 leak. All of the above incidents occur in the 1970s. Laboratory safety was expected to have improved since then, but that has not always been the case. After the SARS outbreak in 2003, laboratories around the world began studying the virus. Since that time, there have been no less than 6 laboratory leaks of SARS. The first occurred at the National University of Singapore, where a student contracted the virus from a sample of the virus. This was followed by an incident in Taiwan, China, where a researcher contracted the virus, possibly during the disinfection of the waste products from the laboratory. After that, several leaks happened at the National Institute of Virology of China. In one incident, a researcher infected her mother with the virus and she died of SARS. In all cases, human negligence, mainly exacerbated by inadequate safety protocols, was the cause of the pathogen's leakage. History has supported the theories being put forward that the current COVID-19 pandemic may have not a natural origin, but we are not in a position to rush into judgment. When it comes to lab leaks, the investigation and review process often takes a long time, and sometimes the answers remain unsatisfactory and incomplete. In the case of the COVID pandemic, we must prepare for the possibility that the world may never know the exact origins of a pandemic that has claimed millions of lives.